Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Excuse me. We are ready to go here. And Jared, oh, hi. Peggy, you'll need to turn off your mic, please, and mute your. There we go. All right, now, if you have a sound turned up in here, you'll need to turn it down because you're already in here with me. The people out there in screencast land who should be here, who are not, but we'll talk about that. Okay, we're going to go down here to week module 3. All right, we've got a couple of things that we want to go over. Let me go over and grab my textbooks. Make sure I'm recording here. All right, and okay, there we go. And wrong one. We'll be ready to go, hopefully. There we go. Okay. All right, let me get the contents. Now, let me get us back here to, all right, here's what we've got coming ahead of us. And again, my apologies to everybody here at class who at the lab who cannot see. I've put in 2 requests to get this fixed. Nothing has been done. I'm not sure what the story is. I will put in a 3rd, but it's been like this since the start of school. So luckily, those of you who are here can hear me. Those of you out there can as well. So we're good to go. And it's absolutely, it's a good fortune for us that we're able to hear and see each other in that sense. Okay, now we have some things that are due, and this is the PAR Inc. That case continued. That's going to be due on the 14th. Then you have the Hewlett case that's due on the 14th, and then you have the Anderson Chapter 5. You have that quiz is due also there on the 14th at 5 o'clock. Now, for this PAR Inc. continued, okay, I want you to notice something here. We've got some directions for you. You're going to continue that, and in the textbook there, pages 149 to 151 will give you a narrative about the case, all right? And then you want to use the PAR mod file in the Chapter 3 student files, okay? And then we're going to explore the sensitivity report in Excel and talk about what that means. And then we're going to cover Hewlett. I probably will cover that on Wednesday. And you'll notice we've got the Hewlett key out there. And I want to take just a few minutes again to review PAR Inc. So I'm going to scroll back up here to the week before and talk about that. And here's the key for PAR Inc. And I'll open it up. And then I'm going to download it to my desktop. I like to show mine in the folder. Then I diminish down my screen, and I park it on the desktop, and we'll talk about it. Now, because I run these like workshops, don't get beguiled into thinking that there's nothing going on. You can sleep through this part. What I typically will do, okay, is be working on, I will be showing you some things that I'm going to ask you to do later on in the course. So it's to your benefit to at least try these, or if you don't, go ahead. It's your benefit to try them and then to take a look when we go over the key and see where you may have done, where you might have done a little bit better. Okay, now if you take a look over here at the right hand side, we're going to try to use solver and to obtain the left hand side and the right hand side using some changes in the constraints. Now, again, here in the lab at BBC, you need to dial into the VMware, okay? And or if you have your own machine, then you'll need to click on options. This will get you to this will, if you don't have solver set up, and then you'll come over here and you'll click okay, and then you click add-ins, okay? And you'll see those that are active are going to be at the top. And you see I have the solver tool pack, I have the analysis tool pack, which is the basic statistics package in Excel. Then I have the solver add-in. If you're going to put anything else in, you just choose it and add it in. So you'll need to have that. And the way that you know that you're set up and ready to go is pretty simple. You go and click on data, okay? And you should see solver in the far right-hand corner. And you'll see it actually over here in the add-ins. Let's see if I can move that down. You'll see it in the analyze section. Now, what we're going to do as we work through these cases is pretty simple. I'm going to be adjusting some of the variables, and I'm going to say, okay, change some of these from what they have in the text. The text will show us an example, and we have the file that has the data in it. And so we'll say, okay, let's alter some of these and see what we would get. Now, part of that is just so you can kind of get comfortable exploring using the tool and understanding what it's trying to do. And the other is to give us an opportunity to talk about or expound upon the fact that when we make decisions, decisions are on a continuous basis. They're not black and white. You'll hear me say that all of the time because we tend to believe that as managers and a lot of decision makers tend to operate from the standpoint of, gee, I have one of two choices, when actually you may believe you have one or two choices. There may be many, many more. And solver is a tool to help you to identify an optional, what are optional outcomes. Now, let me go back. I'm going to open this back up here for a sec. Now I'm going to go over to Vital Source, and I'm going to go over here to the contents. I'm going to go back to chapter 1, okay? And again, just so that we're in good, we understand what's happening. Now, in management science, we try to build a model. Let me just go over here and brief to the contents page, and I'll just jump to chapter 1. And there we go. And the authors here walk us through the difference between problem solving and decision making. Now, they give us an example here of a person who's going to be is trying to evaluate what position or what job they're going to take from a series of from a set of job offers they've been given. So they have to come up with some criteria. And notice here, and this is in figure 1.1, notice that we come down to the point where we're making a decision. We didn't define the problem. And when you hear the word management science, it is exactly what it says, because we try to follow what we know as the scientific method in terms of working with problems that management deals with all the time. Now, the management science is also sometimes called operations research, operations management. A lot of the techniques that we use flowed from problems, logistical problems, all kinds of problems that were occurring when we had really started taking off in the Second World War. And that was because you had to move a lot of people and materials and things, a couple of thousand miles, 5,000 miles. And so we tried to take those problems and rationalize them by using the scientific method to try to identify some alternatives that we can, that we can work from. And that's important. So again, when we come down to the decision-making part, we choose, but then we implement the decision and we evaluate the results. That's the problem-solving part. The key right up here is to define the problem. And if we understand the problem, right, or we have a good handle on what really is the problem, then we're in good shape. Now, talk about that for just a moment. Often as managers, and what you'll experience is you'll go into a situation, or you'll be going through the daily routine of your job, okay, and you'll have some recurring issue or something will happen. And it's important to understand the difference between a symptom of a problem, okay, and the problem itself. If you have high turnover, for example, in your company, that's a symptom of some things going on in your company, either in personnel selection or personnel retention, that are just not working right. So it's imperative that you say, okay, why are people coming in here and working? Now, it may just be that your organization is really structured to do that, whether you really like that or not. And often what you'll find is, especially in some highly technical fields, that one of the reasons that you see so many times that you'll get people who have non-compete agreements, for example, is that they'll come into a small firm, they'll work, they'll build their skills, they'll get some experience, and then they're ready to sell themselves out to the highest bidder. And so a lot of firms, particularly Silicon Valley, does a tremendous amount of work in terms of trying to rope people into non-compete contracts and all that type of stuff. So if you get anything in this text at this point, this really should be in your brain, because this thing of choosing an alternative means, or evaluate the alternative means, I've found some different ways to solve a problem. And as you work through the text, okay, and as you work through the text, and you were seeing the use of algebraic equations and defining using linear algebra to define those feasibility areas, what you'll find, what's implied is there are many, many optimal points I can choose. It's just a decision of what I want to do. So what we're going to do in the workshops is we're going to come in on the front end of that and say, okay, let's change some variables around from what we see in the original case study and see how it changes things. And so let's take a look at this. And what I do when I work on these, and it would be smart for you to do as well, would be to take the directions that I will give you and to cut and paste them into a text file so you can start working, okay? Now, we were going to do some changes in the constraints. Now, as we work through a solver, and I'm going to open it up again just so you can see, all right? We have the objective function. We're going to try to do one of three things. We're going to try to maximize something, we're going to try to minimize it, or we have a target value. All right, those are our decisions. Those are the types of decisions that we're going to make. Then we have some variables that we're going to change. All right, let's say, for example, sales are not what I want them to be. Okay, then a variable I'm going to change is I might change the sales department, some personnel. I might buy some or get some purchase some new advertising. I might look at an additional marketing channel. That's going to be up to me. But we identify these here in those changing variable cells. Then we work with our constraints. We work with what we have to work with. All right? That's basically the first big chunk of what we're doing when we do management science. Now, being normal human beings, all of you and me, we have to study this. There are people for whom this is just so intuitive, they don't need a course in this. And I'll give you a really good example of that. At his first time, in his first stretch of time with Apple, the company that he founded, Stephen Jobs really was focused on product design, etc., that kind of thing, and innovation. Then, when his company went public and they started to have some problems, as is typical, the people on Wall Street said, "Time for adult supervision." So they ousted him and put another gentleman in charge of Apple. And Apple started to go down the tubes. Now, meanwhile, Jobs went over and he changed the movie business. He started Pixar and completely changed it. All these automated features that we have really started with his work, and so he changed that industry. Then when the board came and begged him to come back to save them, he did. But despite all those things you've seen, you'll see him on YouTube, or maybe you'll see him in stories about him or whatever, all those marketing presentations or when he'd unveil the new products, he was really not the design and innovation guy. That started to fall with a group of people. What Stephen Jobs did was to become probably one of the most knowledgeable or expert people in global supply chain who's ever lived. And he understood if he didn't have supply chain, if he didn't have good control over manufacturing processes, it wouldn't matter how well he did with design of product. And so he began to that was what he focused on. And so he was a genius, and he understood that, and he understood that had been one of his problems. So Apple began to build that incredible supply chain that they have today. And that was really where he kind of rebirthed himself as a CEO. And when you think about it, it's pretty remarkable, because rather than going in and saying, "I think I'll do the same stuff I did before," he said, "I really need to focus on the back office operations, because there were a lot of failings that were going on in that sense, especially in terms of supply chain. If you're going to sell millions of iPhones, you better be able to make them." And so he started and get them to people. Well, all that being said, we've talked about the objective function, we've talked about the variable cells, and then the constraints, okay? And then we come down to, what type of decision am I making? Now, we kind of back into this when we look at the solving method. The solving method implies the distribution of data or phenomena. Now, when we choose the simplex LP, as you've seen in the text, we're assuming that there is a linear relationship between two variables. For example, the interest rates and home sales. There's a linear relationship between the two of them, because as the interest rate goes up, the price of a home goes up, and so the demand goes down, and vice versa. And so we have a lot of these variables in business we work with that fit the simplex linear programming method. They're linear in nature, okay? There are some others, and we'll see them as we go through the course, that what we call the GRG nonlinear. Those are functions or phenomena that, when charted or looked at, tend to be concave or convex. And then we have what we call the evolutionary, and that is, we don't know what they look like or how they'll be distributed, so we don't make any assumptions about a prior distribution, i.e. trying to fit the data into some kind of box. Now, because all of you have probably called you out, probably because you've had your stat course or you're taking it now or whatever, you have bought into a black box, okay? And that is, without even knowing it, you intuitively make some assumptions about the probability of occurrences. You intuitively make some assumptions about how phenomena are distributed. Now, if I were to take a look, for example, and I were to say, okay, I'm going to chart the hourly sales of hamburgers at a Jack in the Box, or food, or just food orders. I think they sell breakfast too. And I'm going to see things kind of ramp up and peak around 9:30 or 10 o'clock, maybe 10:30. Then I'm going to see things ramp up and peak out about 12:30 or 1 o'clock, maybe 2. And then for the dinner time or the supper drive, whatever you want to call it, same thing. In other words, like a set of stairs. That's because that's the nature of how people flow into the establishment, place their order, and go. That means I'm working with what roughly we would call a Poisson, and we assume that the data are going to look like that. Okay? So that's why we need it's important for us when we work in a particular industry to have a sense of how things are related on roughly on a certain basis, or how the flow of transactions might occur. All right. Now, back when I was a young person and a kid, Mother's Day, if you didn't call your mom at 5 o'clock in the morning on Mother's Day or near midnight, all you'd get would be a busy signal because the switchboards would be overloaded. Today, that's just not the case. All right. But if you went to, let's say if you went to any of the major sports stadiums yesterday, you went to see an NFL football game, you walk in there. If you're in there, if the game starts at 3 o'clock and you walk in at 10 o'clock, I doubt you'll see too many people sitting there at the gate waiting to get in with their ticket. At 2 o'clock, you'll see a bunch. So we need to understand, when we get a sense of the flows of people or the flows of transactions, then we're ready to try to solve that particular type of problem. And Solver walks us through those 3 types, okay? Now, let's look at this for just a minute, and I'm going to close the Solver off, all right? And we wanted to change some of these constraints, okay? Now, if you look over here, first of all, let's talk about the products that we're making. We're making a standard, and I think they're making bags, handbags, or something like that. I've got 2 types, standard and deluxe. All right? And I've got an amount of time budgeted to make each one. And I have some activities or processes that occur: cutting and dyeing, sewing, finishing, inspection, and packaging. All right? And then we have the amount of time that we can devote to that for a standard bag, and the amount of time we devote to that for a deluxe model. And so what we're going to try to do is to make the correct mix of standard and deluxe bags so that we maximize our profit, because we make different amounts of profit per bag, as you can see, 10 and 9. Okay? Now, the figures that you see, I'm going to highlight this here, this array, if you will. These data are the authors really are presenting us a summary. When you see these, think like you're taking a finance course, for example, and you're seeing a company's statements, their income statement, their balance sheet, maybe a statement of cash flows, because these are summary types of data, or they're data points. If you go back in the original data, they originate in one of 2 places. Either, really 3. 1, they have company historic data, and so if you believe that the past is prologue of the future, you might rely on that. Okay. Secondly, in some industries, you'll know the standards because they're published, or people will share them, and you kind of have a good idea of how much time it should take. While the automakers would all go to jail if they all said, okay, let's sell every car SUV at a certain price, but they do share quite openly standards in terms of manufacturing processes, because in almost every automobile, you're going to find maybe a few suppliers in that industry. So people will tend to know, or there'll be industry standards that are established. If you're management students and you took the production course, I'm hoping that you've covered the learning curves so that you understand that concept. Well, that being said, these data just weren't pulled from thin air. They came from maybe industry sources, maybe sources that are based on our historic data, but they represent a best guesstimate in terms of what we should be able to do or have done. And that's important because the practical piece of this is all worthless. It's all junk, and you'll get junk for an output if these aren't good data. Now, what we've done is we've created an issue here in terms of changing the constraints, okay? And we've made some changes in the constraints here for each of them. Now, we also changed the amount of time available. All right, and we pop this up here. All right, and you can see here's the constant. And we said, okay, if you look back at the original problem, I think there was like 600 hours available for cutting and dyeing. This may be an issue of we're going to try to cut costs. This may be an issue that we want to try to fulfill. Maybe this is a staple for us, or a standard kind of product, set of products that we sell, and then suddenly we get some special order and we've got to divert resources over to do that. Or, that's most typical is this kind of issue where I've got to divert some resources, okay? And in order to go ahead and fill my usual orders, do what I usually do, but at the same time, maybe meet a special order or special request. It could be one of those kinds of things. The authors don't give us, they give us more of snippets of a case, because if they gave you cases, if the authors gave you this basic textbook and then real heavy duty cases with all the detail, you'd be talking about a textbook about 4,000 pages. It'd probably cost you $1,000. People that major in this field, they pay for that. Now, one thing I also want to remind you, as we go through the text, you're going to see solutions, and you'll see them solutions figures that will show you the solution via Lingo, which is that baby optimizer program that the authors and the publisher have created. I saved you $200 by not forcing you to buy it. Okay, you can do the same thing in Excel, and I think it's far easier to understand. But nonetheless, what we've done is we've cut the time available by 5%. Okay, and here we are. And we had different amounts of hours for each of these. Well, we said I'm going to cut everything across the board by 5%. Now that decision alone, that's just kind of across kind of a back of the envelope type of thing. You might, on the time available, you might reduce some of them. You probably would not reduce them in a uniform fashion like this, but just to keep it easy to understand and see what we're going to try to do, I just went ahead and did that. Okay, now I'm going to stop you for a second here, and I see I've got some folks. Okay, sorry. Anybody have a question I could try to answer for you right now about this? No? You say this is fairly simple. It seems fairly logical. Yes, it is. That's one of its great strengths and also one of its great weaknesses. If you can get it ingrained inside you that when you make a decision, first of all, the set of alternatives that you have in terms of dealing with a particular problem or issue may or may not be as bounded as you believe they are, and the potential outcomes may or may not be as bounded as you think they are. One of the great fallacies of most organizations is a thing where they believe in the equifinality of output. Here's what they mean. They say, okay, if I have the same input every single time, I'm going to get the same output every single time. And that's just not true. If that was true, everybody in the United States, every college student who goes to college would have the same SAT. If every product that was made, there would be no product defects, or they'd all have the same defect. So this is as much about your thought processes and your logic as you approach decision making is it is just about crunching some numbers. Well, we went ahead and we changed these constraints. We assumed we needed to change them down. And then we came down to, we want to maximize the total profit. Okay, and we're looking at the profit per bag times the number of bags produced. Ditto on the deluxe. B is the standard. Deluxe is the is column C. And so that's our objective function right here. Now, these are the bags we'll produce, and the solver will determine that in terms of the constraints that we have. Now, let's go down and look at that. Now, the textbook's going to use some terms that can seem a little mysterious, but they're really not. All right. Again, remember, we're trying to achieve some optimality, means the best balance possible. All right. And so if you come down to the bottom, if you come down here into this constraints area, the LHS, the left-hand side, RHS is the right-hand side, what you're going to see is that we're engaged in some Boolean logic. We're trying to determine, should they be equal? Should it be equal or less than? Should it be equal to and greater than? Or should it be greater than? Okay? And so what we've said is this. On the left-hand side, the number of hours used cannot be any more than the number of hours available. It's got to be less. Got it? Can't be more. So I set that constraint. Same thing with the sewing, same thing with the finishing, same thing with the inspection and the packaging. Now, one of the things about this case that's really interesting to me is that there's the time that's put into the cutting and dyeing process. And you can see that's a huge chunk. The finishing process too, which I would suspect that the finishing process probably would involve some human interaction with those products, materials. All right, so we've got that done. We've worked through, and we want to try to maximize our total profit. And so I'm going to click on Solver. All right, let me close this off for a second. Then it appears we may not get smothered. Okay. Now, we're going to click Solve. And it'll say Solver found a solution. So that's the good news. We have a solution. Now, we can get some reports. There are 3 reports you can get in Solver. 1 is the answer report, 2 is a sensitivity report, and the 3rd is the limits report. The answer report is nice because in Excel, I think it does a nice job of explaining to you what happened. It gives you cell references, it gives you variables, etc. The sensitivity analysis is of extreme importance, because it gives you a sense of the marginal utility of what you're going to do. You say, "Oh, marginal utility sounds like econ all over." I understand that. If you're going to spend $1 and make 45 cents, wouldn't it be better just to keep the $1 in your pocket? Especially if it's your shareholders' money. If you have $1 and you're going to make $1.25, and and you're going to undertake a project that has a risk equal to what you would expect, spend the $1. Okay. It never ceases to amaze me, particularly in the large corporations, banks particularly, tend to forget whose money they're playing with. It's generally the U.S. taxpayer who's invested with them, and the U.S. taxpayer who has bailed them out. Okay, and I won't get you won't get me into that litany about what happened in 2008, but oh well. But nonetheless, I've got the sensitivity that will give me a sense of marginal utility, and I'm always interested in that. If I sell 1 more unit, what do I get? And we do this for a simple reason. We know, because of marginal utility, that there's an optimal point. Marginal utility runs like an arc, and at the top of the arc, I am getting the maximum utility I'm going to get. Any additional any additional units, and it starts to fall off. All right. It's a lot like, to me, well, a simple thing would be pizza. Okay. I love pizza. I am a pizza hound. I could eat pizza cold. I could have a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Okay. But there is a point at which after the fifth piece, I go, I may have had too many pieces of pizza, because now, rather than the flavor, I'm experiencing what? A gastronomical event. And so I didn't think through that. It's the same thing as people who consume alcohol. You know, they think they have this foolish notion that they know when they've had just about the right enough where they'll be really enjoying themselves, but they won't, you know, crash the car or any of that. And like the Bible says, strong drink is a mocker, and the devil knew about marginal utility long before you and I did. Okay, so I've got these three reports. Now I have a third one, the limits report, that will give me something that kind of mimics what I would say would be the standard normal area or standard normal curve. We know, for example, you've had your stat, that if data are distributed, quote unquote, normally, if they are parametric, okay, then we know that between a sigma 1, delta 1 or sigma 1, that is one standard deviation above the mean and one standard deviation below the mean, that 68% of all observations will fall within that area. Then I know between plus 1 and plus 2, there's 14%. Minus 1 and minus 2 is another 14%. And so I account for about 96% of all observations fall within standard deviations sigma 2 and sigma minus 2. And then the remainder out there, the other, at plus 3, you've got about another 2%. Okay? So the limits report will mimic that for you, so that you go, okay, here are my parameters. Okay, and you can almost literally take that limits report and work with it in that sense. Now, one of the nice things about this is I could stop today and say, just go work with all the other cases in the book. The only thing that will be different will be you'll be working with some nonlinear, or you'll be working with some evolutionary, and I don't care what the problem is. This is the template. That's why I emphasize over and over and over. All right, if you get that in your mindset, you're way, way, way ahead in the game. If I wanted to torture all of you, here's what I would do. I would make you produce the linear algebra and do that charts for me for every single class. And I know that for years, we had students burning up green engineering paper doing linear algebra, and I'm not sure if they really understood why they were doing it or what they got from it. I don't know. Because this is more about your thought processes than crunching numbers. Okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at those. And I'm going to click on the answer report and the sensitivity report and the limits report. I'm going to go okay. Now the book will also give you some verbiage, a lot of verbiage about interpreting and using these reports, and I encourage you to go take a look at them and study them. It's up to you to get an understanding of what you're looking at. Now, one other thing is important. I would not pretend to tell you, okay, that you can use this tool or understand what you're doing if you don't have some industry experience, okay? I've never worked in the extractive energy business. I've never worked in a company or managed a company or been a supervisor where people go rip coal out of the mountains or people go get petroleum or natural gas. Okay? Never done that. I understand it intellectually what's going on, but from the gut instinct part, the part what we would call the heuristics, that I don't get it. But that's why with experience in a given industry, you'll have data here that have some meaning, and you'll have these reports that will help you through. As we're going to see later on, one of the ways that we take solver and put it on steroids is real simple. We utilize random data. We'll use the we can use the rand between functions, but typically we'll use the rand function to simulate these outcomes. You could do it with this by taking, for example, the cutting and dyeing and simulate that out 1,000 times, 2,000 times, as much as you want. Then grab some summary statistic from that. You might grab the mode, or most people would probably would grab the median. It would depend on that variable and the nature of it. Okay. Now, I've never worked in a clothing factory. I've never designed clothes. I don't understand a lot of anything actually about cutting and dyeing. But if I did, again, this is where experience is so important. I could make some sense if I took these data and I randomized them and I pulled them out of I pulled some summary statistic out of a set of randomized data. And that's when you really take solver and you put it on steroids, and you can really start to say, okay, what are the real parameters on this? What will this look like? It's the same thing with financial spreadsheets. I've told this story before. Early on in my career, I did a lot of cash flow analysis with a firm that did mergers and acquisitions. And we were just starting to see spreadsheets. But it would be, if in 3 months we could get a 2, maybe to 3 reasonable models for the 2 parties involved, where we'd say, well, okay, we went through a process where we'd find, okay, where are the bodies buried? What's the stuff that goes bump in the night? Which of these figures here, or these situations, customers or whatever, is likely to blow up? And then we could run some scenarios and say, here, these look like some possible outcomes, and they could determine, 1, do we want to do this? And 2, if there's somebody to step in to provide the financing, usually if people merge, somebody's got to get if it's a merger or acquisition, somebody's got to get the pot sweetened, okay? And it's usually whoever is being pursued, the suitor will have to give them some extra money. So if the suitor doesn't have the money, then they got to go borrow the money from a venture capitalist, and that really puts the dynamics. And by the time I left, after 10 years, goodness gracious, we could run hundreds of simulations, and we could walk to a client and say, here you are, these are the possible outcomes, and have some confidence in them that we were giving them some real data. And I got out of it when I started feeling like the liabilities associated with were just not worth the trouble, because it became a thing where it didn't matter how much money. Maybe let's say that you were in a company and your stock was trading at $85, and you'd get purchased, or you'd merge, and then your stock you'd get a premium so that you would agree to the deal, and you'd get $120. And then there'd always be those 5 people who'd file a class action saying, I should have got $400. They got the math wrong, or they're evil people. At that point, I said, this is nonsense. I don't want to have anything to do with it. Well, here we see, now let's look at these reports, okay? And we'll do a little bit of exploration. And I'm going to leave it to you also to do. You've got some assignments you've got the chapters of the book, and I encourage you to go in and look very carefully at these results and look at what the text has to say about them, okay, so that you start to really get a grasp of what we're trying to do. Now, they told us all constraints and optimality conditions are satisfied, so we're good to go. And then here's the maximum product standard, okay, and they give us the original value and a final value, all right, and the bags are produced, all right. And notice something here. As you come down to the constraints area, you'll start to see some of those things that tend to go bump in the night. You say, what do you mean? Look down there at the sewing hours, okay? the sewing hours is you have a non-binding status because you've got some slack time there. Slack meaning extra. You'll see the same thing down there on the inspection and packaging hours. This gives you some food for thought to say, if I move some more resources, if I cut the resources for that variable, that constraint, excuse me, what does it look like? Can I still stay within that zone of optimality? Now, if you look at the sensitivity report, okay, you're going to see you're going to see issues in terms of reduced cost up here, and then you're going to see a term called the shadow price. The shadow price is also known as the dual value, and the shadow price is just simply that margin utility I talked about that says if I do one more of these or buy one more, or sell one more, what value additional utility do I get from it? The shadow price is AKA the dual value in your text. Economists have used shadow price a lot to try to say, okay, and you'll see some journal articles where they'll say, okay, we're concerned about the degradation of Yellowstone Park, and okay, right now we know that we have 2 million visitors a year. And every year, the people, and you'll see it on the video, where somebody confronts a moose, or a moose confronts somebody, or a black bear jumps into the car, or that stuff, or to take care of the traffic flow, we widen the road, we add another place where people can sleep and stay, we expand the camping. At what point do we do that, and what do we lose? You'll see these types of shadow pricing also in studies where they say, okay, we're going to build this pipe from Alaska, okay, and what does it look like? How much will it cost? And if we have a spill, what's typically a few 100,000 gallons? Okay, we can live with that. We pollute a few rivers, we can live with that. What price can we extract from ourselves? Now, this is probably in my business ethics class a long time ago, and some of you, I don't think any of you are probably old enough to remember, but there was an automobile manufacturer that made a vehicle that had a rear engine, and when that car would get hit from the rear engine, because it had its gas tank back there, that car would go up in flames immediately. And as there were class action suits and people went to trial, there was this spectacle where it really came down to the manufacturer saying, well, we know that we're going to kill a few hundred people, but if we don't manufacture this, we're going to lose a lot of money. So we're willing to kill a few hundred people and do some settlements and payout, as opposed to just not make the car. And he said, people literally, yes. And the annals of the trial testimony will send a chill up your spine. And you say, Lordy, Lordy. No wonder the public at times just doesn't even trust us. Okay, folks, well, listen, I went over a minute. You have my deep apologies for taking an extra minute and being enthused about my subject matter. I'm sorry. I apologize. I know it's a grievous sin. I hope you'll go and study and take a look at these. Look at the limits report, the solution, and we'll talk about Hewlett on Wednesday. Thank you much. Have a good one. Anybody have a question before I close this off?
Dr. Harmon?
Yes.
I had a question. Is this what we upload for the revised PAR Inc. assignment?
No, the PAR Inc. you're going to use the file in there called PAR mod, M-O-D.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned that there in the Canvas. Let me pop this out for a sec. We'll go back over the modules. Yeah, I hear the module. And yeah, Now this is module 3, so you'll see here, I'm talking about the PAR Inc. Okay, PAR Inc. continued, there's the page numbers, and you're going to use the PAR mod, and that's in the chapter 3 student files, okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, you betcha. Anybody else? You guys setting good? Anybody? All right. Okay, folks, thank you much. Have a good one.